Peptides are everywhere right now. Your gym buddy's talking about them. There's a podcast episode about them every other week. RFK Jr. is talking about this stuff. And your TikTok and Instagram feed is full of people injecting things into their stomachs and claiming that it changed their lives. And now it's becoming a bit of a multi-level marketing Herbalife type strategy because I'm seeing many people recruiting others to sell their peptides. And you're probably sitting in there thinking, what the hell are peptides in the first place? Are they steroids? Are they legal? Should I be taking them? Am I missing out on this stuff? So in this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly what you need to know if you're a newbie in understanding what peptides are, where to find them, and whether or not you should be taking them. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Andres. I'm a registered dietitian. I work with over 600 people over the course of my 13 years experience as a dietitian. I hold a master's in exercise science and sports nutrition. I spend a lot of time looking at every single thing in longevity and health, particularly peptides. So let me break it all down for you. But before we get into it, make sure you hit subscribe if you want to make sure you're not missing on the future serious videos on this peptides. And also there's a bunch of other videos on really implementable stuff that you can take into consideration when it comes down to longevity, health, weight loss, and nutrition. So let me break it all down for you. Here's what we're going to be covering: what peptides actually are, what the science says, what's happening with the regulations right now around them, and which ones are people actually using, and my honest take on the ones you should and shouldn't be even considering. This is again part of a full series, so let's get right into it. Let's start simple. Peptides are short chain of amino acids. They're essentially the links that make up chains, and those chains make up polypeptides, and polypeptides make up proteins. So if proteins are the long sentences, peptides are just the short phrases. Your body already makes them naturally. What makes them interesting is that they act as signaling molecules. They tell a specific system in your body to do specific things. Think of them like targeted instructions. It's not a blunt force drug that affects everything. It's a precise signal that says, hey, repair this tissue, release this hormone, reduce this stain. This is why there's so many different peptides being studied right now. Each one does something different. Some target recovery, some target gut health, some target sleep, some target growth hormones, some target fat metabolism, some target your hunger levels, aka GLP-1s. We're gonna get into that, but they're not steroids. They're not hormones, and they don't work the same way. A steroid, for example, floods your system with something. A peptide sends a signal to your body to do more of what it already knows how to do. That distinction is super important, and it matters, and is one that most people on the internet are either getting wrong or they don't necessarily understand. So why is everyone suddenly talking about peptides? Well, two things happened. Number one, GLP-1 agonist. Think Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro. They brought peptide therapy into the mainstream because those are peptides. Most people don't even realize that. They just think of them as weight loss drugs. They are synthetic peptides that mimic a hormone your gut already produces. When those blew up, it opened the door to a much bigger conversation because people started asking questions like, wait, there are other peptides for recovery, for gut health, for cognitive function? And the answer is yes, there's a whole world beyond the weight loss side of this. Second, the longevity and optimization community adopted peptides real hard. The first guy that I heard it from was Ben Greenfield. He was a podcaster, like optimizer, biohacker, and whatever it is. And they started talking about compounds like BPC 157. He was talking about the fact that he injected it in his sites and he was healing his injuries and all these different things like that. So I was like, okay, well, like, that's scary. You're injecting something in your body. But I was curious. Other things like TB500, growth hormone peptides, they were talking about this stuff as tools for performance and recovery. And that's when it started hitting social media, particularly when political figures like RFK Jr. started to bring stuff up around this, or you will start to listen to doctors or certain people talking about this in big podcasts like Joe Rogan. Now, everyone has an opinion, and most of them are either trying to sell you something or have zero clinical background. And that's what makes this very, very tricky. The signal to noise ratio on peptide information right now, it's awful. It's terrible. Here's what it gets real. And I'm going to be very straight with you on this because most people skip over this part altogether. Most peptides are not FDA approved. Repeat after me. They're not FDA approved for human use. They have been sold primarily as research compounds or through compounding pharmacies. But let me give you some background on this. Here's what happened. In late 2023, the FDA moved 19 commonly used peptides to their Category 2 list. That essentially banned compounding pharmacies from making them. The reasoning was, well, safety concerns. There's not enough human data, potential for contamination, immunogenicity risks. And a lot of clinicians and compounding pharmacies push back hard because they're like, hey, this stuff may be helping people. They argued that the FDA, they just basically overstepped, that there was no specific safety signal that justified the restriction on a lot of these compounds, and that the ban actually made things worse because it pushed people towards unregulated gray market sources, which was a good point. And what happened is that random websites started selling vials with zero quality control. Now, here's the latest, and this is very recent. In February 2026, the Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., which I have some thoughts about, announced that roughly 14 of those 19 peptides are expected to move back into Category 1. That means that compounding pharmacies can legally prepare them with a physician's prescription. This includes BPC 157, which we mentioned earlier, thymosin, alpha-1, TB500, CJC 1295, ipamorelin, AOD 9604, and several others. But, and this is critical, moving back into Category 1 does not mean that it's FDA approved. It means that a compounding pharmacy can make it for you if a doctor prescribes it. That's it. They're still off-label. They still require physician oversight, and sourcing still matters more than the peptide itself. If you're buying peptides from a random website that says research use only, you have no idea what's on that vial because no third-party testing is required. In fact, they're being sold technically to be used for research purposes only. There are no pharmaceutical grade standards and no accountability around it. In fact, when I started hearing about peptides, I started taking that stuff back in 2019 before this was even talked about. And I do remember taking something, it wasn't injected, it was a dropper that started giving me heart palpitations. And ever since then, I was like, I'm not doing this again. So here's my message. If you go this route, you want to get peptides from licensed compounding pharmacies that follow USP 797 and 795 standards with third-party testing and a certificate of analysis. That's the basic baseline that you need to have in place when it comes down to this. Again, there's like 3 categories that you need to understand. There's research only, no oversight. There's professional use, which are the ones that your doctor can prescribe to a licensed compounding pharmacy. And then there's going to be FDA approved peptides, which in this case right now, there's a few, like most of your GLP-1 drugs, like Mounjaro and Ozempic and all those different things like that, which require prescription, but that are also FDA approved. So let's get a little bit into what kind of peptides are out there. Let me give you a quick overview of the peptides people are asking about the most. I'm going to go deeper on each of these in future videos in the series, but here's the landscape. Number 1, BPC 157, stands for body protection compound or body protective compound. It is derived from a protein that is found in human gastric juices, believe it or not. And the research, which is done mostly on animal studies, which is literally like most of these peptides, it shows accelerated healing in tendons, ligaments, and muscle tissue. It has strong data on gut lining repair, which is actually going to be extremely helpful with people with IBS and gut health issues and all these different things like that, because essentially it's healing people's guts. This is the most talked about peptide, to be honest, in the recovery space right now, and I'm going to do a full breakdown of this in future videos. Then we have TB500, or thymosin beta-4. This is another recovery peptide. It's being studied for tissue repair, flexibility, and reducing inflammation. It's often paired up with the BPC 157 by practitioners. In fact, there's a compound or a name or the way that they commonly refer it to, which is they call it the Wolverine stack. And essentially, they combine these peptides to support massive healing and recovery properties. Then we have CJC 1295 and ipamorelin. These are growth hormone releasing peptides. They don't give you growth hormone directly. They signal your pituitary gland to produce more of it naturally. People use this for sleep quality, for recovery, for building lean muscle, and for metabolic function. These are typically all taken together. AOD 9604, this is a fragment of human growth hormone, specifically the part that's being studied for fat metabolism. It doesn't have the same growth promoting effects as full growth hormone, and it's usually used or targeted at metabolic health. Then we have thymosin alpha-1, which is an immune modulating peptide. It's being studied in the context of infectious disease and also for supporting things like cancer and general immune function. This actually has a lot more human data behind it compared to a lot of the other peptides that I shared on this list. There's another category, which is GLP-1 agonists. Semaglutide, tirzepatide, these are going to be the names, the actual compounded names, not the brand names. But the ones or the branded names you're going to know them as is Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, Zepbound. These are actually FDA approved, which puts them in a completely different regulatory category than everything else I just mentioned in this video, like I said earlier. They deserve their own video, and they'll get one. I have talked about GLP-1s way back in a separate video, but it was long ago. It was probably a couple years ago, and I think I probably need to do an update on that. Essentially, these are the only peptides out there that actually have the FDA approved stamp on them. Then we have something called SLANK and SMAX. These are neuropeptides. They're studied for cognitive function, focus, and anxiety. These are very popular in the nootropic space, less mainstream, but they're starting to gain some traction. Those are the most common ones. Again, there is a very long list of peptides. These are just like that most people are talking about, but if I show you the list of peptides being sold in some of these compounded pharmacies, there's probably over 200. Each one of these peptides have a different mechanism. They have a different evidence base and different risk profiles. Lumping them all together as peptides is like lumping ibuprofen and chemotherapy together as medicine. They're not the same thing. Now, here's my honest perspective on all this stuff. Peptides are tools. They're very interesting tools. Some of them have genuinely good, promising research behind them, but they're not a replacement for the fundamentals. But before we get into that, it's really important for you to understand something. They don't have a ton of human clinical trials, which that in itself raises a ton of flags. Why? It doesn't mean that they don't work. In fact, when you look at a lot of the anecdotal evidence, which is essentially the anecdotes that people share of their experience doing this stuff, there's a really good positives. But at the same time, we don't know the long-term effects of injecting peptides into our body for a long period of time or even once. We don't really know the safety profiles of these. We don't really know a ton of stuff. It is kind of scary that even doctors are prescribing this without a whole ton of human research on this stuff. And whether you want to consider this because big pharma is like pushing against this because it's really trying to push more for drugs, or whether it's because, there's just not enough funding to really be able to like research some of this stuff, that's besides the point. The main message that I'm trying to drive across this video is the following. As of the time of this recording, today in 2026, there's not a whole lot of human clinical trial on the efficacy of these peptides. It's definitely getting a lot more attention, and we're most likely going to see more stuff. And I'm most likely going to have to do, if I'm still doing YouTube videos in 5 years, a complete different conversation. But as of right now, you have to be careful with not only where you're sourcing this stuff, but also understanding that you need to be taking this at your own risk. But again, and the main point that I also wanted to make today is that you have to still focus on fundamentals. And I said this to a client the other day. These stuff, like no matter the amount of peptides that you're really pushing in your body, is not going to remove the fact that you're just not focusing on good sleep, nutrition, training, and stress management. That's still doing 90% of the work. Peptides sit in the last 10%, just like supplements do. But for the right person at the right stage, that 10% can be truly meaningful. Here's the people that should not be looking at peptides right now. If your nutrition is a mess, if you're sleeping 5 hours a night, if you have no training structure, or basically what I'm saying, if you haven't really built the right foundation yet, peptides are not your next step. So please, when you run into influencers pushing this, telling you they're going to fix your hormones and all the different things like that, but your lifestyle is a mess, don't. You're trying to optimize something that doesn't exist yet. Now, here's who this might actually make sense for. If you got those fundamentals locked in, you're training consistently, your nutrition is dialed in, your sleep is solid, and you're just simply looking for a nudge on recovery and gut health and body composition. I personally fall in that category. That's where the conversation becomes relevant then when I'm creating content about this stuff. And even then, you should be doing this under the guidance of a medical professional. I'm currently not on any type of peptide treatments. Now, I have NAD, which is not necessarily a peptide, but I have actually dabbled into the idea of potentially testing and trying out some peptides. But I'm not ready for that yet. And I promise that when I do it, just like I did my NAD injections, I'm definitely going to do it under the care of a medical professional. Not because I heard it on a podcast, not because I heard it on a TikTok video or an Instagram reel, or not because there's a gym buddy out there that said that it changed his life. Here's something important that I mentioned earlier and that we need to address. The peptide space right now is attracting a lot of people who have no business recommending these compounds. There's multi-level marketing companies that are selling peptides. People with zero medical credentials are recommending those in protocols, and influencers are promoting specific brands because they're getting paid to do that. This is a real problem because peptides are very powerful signaling molecules, and getting the wrong compound, the wrong dose, or the wrong source can have real consequences. So please be extremely careful who you're taking advice from, because if the person recommending a peptide to you is trying to just simply sell it to you, that should tell you everything that you need to know. Here's the bottom line. Peptides are not magic. They're not a scam either. They are category compounds with real mechanisms and in many cases, very promising but incomplete research. The people that I see getting real results with peptides aren't just adding a compound and just hoping that it works. They already have their nutrition and the training and the recovery dialed in. The peptide becomes the multiplier, not the foundation, and that's how it works. Peptide treatments work best inside of a system. This is the same thing I'm talking about GLP-1s. GLP-1s can help you lose the weight, cut your hunger in half, like do all these different things like that to cut down your calorie intake. But the moment you remove them, everything goes back to the way it was before. So if you're not building the foundation, none of the stuff is going to work long term. This video is part 1 of a full series I'm making on peptides. I'm gonna go dive deeper into things like BPC 157, GLP-1s, growth hormone peptides, and more. So if you want to follow along and get into the conversation with me and the community of people who are actually doing this the right way, make sure that you're dropping a comment, hit subscribe, hit that bell icon so you're notified the next time that a new video comes out from me. And let's continue to keep the conversation going. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. I'll see you in the next video.